So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about parts work. And to get started into parts work, we have to start at the very beginning. So this is the smallest piece of a set of nesting dolls. And you can see it has nothing on it. It is as pure as a nesting doll could possibly be. And we're going to pretend that that's our infant self that enters the world. The moment of conception, the moment that we are a very being of existence. I like to believe that that is perfect, whole, and complete just as it is. It is inextricable from the oneness of the universe, whether that's a God-like relationship, a spiritual relationship, or if it's just being one with the universe as a part of being matter on this planet or in this universe. It is pure, perfect, whole, and complete. I want to introduce this concept that's referred to as the three selves. So the three selves represent kind of a collection of our parts that fall into three very basic categories. The first is what we're going to call the wounded self. So the wounded self comes into this experience in life when our sense of perfection, our innocence as a baby, something happens where a need we have doesn't get met, or we experience some kind of traumatic experience. And we end up getting wounded. Now, the wound can be physical in nature. It could be something that's just perceived. It may not even have actually happened, but if we think it happened, or if we think it happened a certain way, doesn't matter how it actually happened. If we think it happened a certain way, that creates our memory. So I'm going to get a little vulnerable and talk about a wounded part that I have. And when I was about 5, my dad and my mom divorced. And I remember the last fight that I could remember in the house where my dad left and never came home. And I remember being 5, and I'm standing in the hallway, and I'm watching my dad leave, and I'm wondering, is he coming back? Will I ever see him again? Does he not want me? I mean, all kinds of questions came out of this, I'm sure. And in that moment, I took on the belief that 1, my dad has left me, and 2, I am not wanted. And those make up the abandonment wound. So, abandonment. Now, here's the reality. My dad didn't abandon me because he's been around my entire life. If I have to get in touch with him, I can call him. If I want to go see him and get a hug, I can go drive over to his house and get a hug. My dad has been present physically to me if I've needed him. Now, I didn't live with him, and I might have only got to see him every other weekend. But he's been available to me. He did not abandon me. And yet I experienced the perception of abandonment based on the stories in my head. So what do we do when we are wounded? Well, we build up armor because we don't ever want to feel that pain again. And we have parts of ourselves that say, no, that's never getting touched again. So we're going to protect against it. Now keep in mind, these wounds, they happen when we're little. So the strategies to prevent us from feeling that again or having that wound get touched, those defensive strategies also come with the skill level of a very young part. Might be 6, 7, 8. I mean, these are often, a lot of my parts are in that range from 5 to 8. We don't want to experience pain, so what do? Well, we come up with strategies to prevent us from feeling that way. So that introduces the concept of the defended self. So the defended self, its goal is to make sure that our wound never gets touched. So it goes and it gets the protection of the defended self. So what is the defended self going to do? Well, it's going to suppress. Don't look at anything that's vulnerable, because if you do, that wound might get touched. How does that relate to abandonment? Well, it might say, don't ever expect to be in a relationship because they'll just leave. Or I might hustle and try to be clingy to a partner in fear that they're going to leave. That would be another type of survivor self strategy. Brene Brown talks about those things that will keep us from cultivating love. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection all damage the roots from which love grows, and love can only survive if those injuries are acknowledged, healed, and rare. So we shame people. That's a defensive strategy. We disrespect people. We say harmful things. That is a strategy. If we express our disrespect, it helps to build up a defense and distance ourselves from the other. We might even face betrayal. The betrayal is trying to deflect through numbing. So if someone is, say, in an extramarital affair, they're numbing the experience of facing whatever their reality is. Or they might be trying to hurt their partner. That would be another defensive strategy. I had an experience where my dad and I were supposed to have weekly guitar lessons, and he wasn't able to make a particular session. And so I started to resent him, and then I stopped the sessions and didn't show up again for another session. We stopped doing the sessions. That was like 5 years ago. Resentment. It was a defensive strategy. I didn't want to experience my fear of abandonment because my dad wasn't able to show up for our lessons the last few times. So rather than sit with that from a constructive perspective, my defensive strategy was to isolate. Often, the defended self will isolate, and it does so often in the form of addiction. These are not great experiences, but they're very well intended to protect the wounded part. It would be really easy to want to purge this whole thing. It would be really easy to try and stuff it and not look at it. It would be really easy to find a place of self-righteousness and say, well, this is just human. And that's actually a step in the right direction. But the reality is, while our defended selves are likely driving the bus, so to speak, most of the time, the reality is we can cultivate an awareness of when we're doing it. And we can also cultivate an awareness of what our wounds are. And if we know what the wounds are, and we know and have a cultivated awareness of how we might show up in our defended selves, then we can start to witness what is happening. And that is where the healthy self comes into picture. And the biggest role of the healthy self, in my opinion, is to witness. All you want to do is pay a mind's eye, its attention, to whatever the present experience is. So earlier today, I noticed that as Ricardo was leaving to go to a concert, that I suddenly started feeling really weepy. And I just didn't understand why, because we've been spending, the last 24 hours together. And anyways, I just noticed that I was really weepy. And so I leaned in and got curious. Well, one of the things about the healthy self is it allows us the ability to be curious without judgment, to say, ooh, I'm feeling some emotion. I'm feeling kind of weepy. I wonder what that's about. I don't try to suppress it. I don't try to numb it. I am able to lean into kindness and love for myself so that I can gain clarity about what the situation is. From the healthy self, all we need to do is witness what our experience is without judgment. So, from the healthy self's perspective, I might say, oh, I see that there's an addiction thing going on for me, cigarette smoke, nicotine. That's been a very real experience for me recently. So I can witness, okay, I'm experiencing the addiction. I can witness that if I'm upset at, let's say that I'm upset in my relationship and I am hurt. Well, I may not have the ability, or I might not feel the inclination to want to be close with them physically, and so I might withhold some affection. It's a defensive strategy. I can witness when I'm doing that. And I might even begin to cultivate an awareness of witnessing that I want to behave that way. But what if we just witness when we're doing it without even having to change it? If I'm using language such that it is disrespectful, I might begin to witness when I want to say something like, fuck you, which I recently had, where I literally thought to myself, I want to say fuck you, but I didn't. Why? Because I became aware. I had started to pay a mind's eye witness to when I feel that heated, and I've chosen to pause. Sometimes I'm better at it than others. And then, if I am creating an awareness of all of my defended strategies, I'm also going to start to bring into awareness, well, what is the wound? And in this case, abandonment. So what does the healthy self do with all this? It witnesses all of these experiences and all these messages. And through the process of active listening, which is just witnessing an experience and reflecting back what was heard or expressed about it, without judgment, without personalization, without offering any feedback or advice. We listen to what the experience of the defended self is and what the wounded self is. We listen, and we don't judge, we just hear. And we can actually work with these parts internally and offer them compassion. That comes from the healthy self. How do we do that? Well, I might metaphorically hold my parts and say, yeah, that abandonment wound got touched, didn't it? So we know the data. Ricardo left to go to a concert, which is absolutely okay, and something we want him to do. And yet, when he left, it was like interesting that I felt this weepy feeling, and I've been able to identify that it was like abandonment. The reality is he did not abandon me, but it felt that way for some reason. It was a reminder of abandonment in my past. And I just noticed the tightness in my chest as I say that. So I'm witnessing that that's happening. So I'm offering some compassion that, yeah, we experienced a perceived abandonment wound in childhood that was very painful and absolutely charted the course of the rest of my life. It was nobody's fault. There's no room for shame and blame. It just is. And we know how to get through this stuff.